Great. Hello and welcome everybody to the Words Festival Conversation Series, a new initiative at the festival that we have just launched this year to engage with the audience here in London, Ontario, as well as those who found us online during the COVID-19 pandemic across Canada, here in London, and even into the United States. So we're really grateful for everybody for joining us here. I'm Josh Lambier, the director of the Words Festival, and I'm going to be the host of our new series, coming to you live here today from TAP. I would like to extend a very warm note of thanks to Sandra DeSalvo and the wonderful team here at TAP, especially Sarah Legault and Kieran Belanger, as well as all of the volunteers who join us, for hosting today's event. It's a beautiful space, and we're grateful to them for offering us a spot in the city to celebrate the cultural life of the city and region. So a brief thank you to Sandra and to the team here for hosting us. Our featured guest today, acclaimed London playwright and author Jason Ripp, is no stranger to TAP, having authored exactly 100 plays and having directed or produced several of them here in the theater space. One of those plays is even set in this building when it was known as Hawthorne's Hotel, if I have that correctly, and it unearths the Crystal Hall disaster of 1907, when the building next door collapsed, killing 7 people, as well as the unsolved murder of a young laundress named Daisy Bottoms, I believe. It's a play that brings to the fore Jason's decades-long, and I might even say career-long, fascination with the legends, folklore, and forgotten histories of the region of Southwestern Ontario, often with a keen eye trained towards the unsettling, the macabre, and the weird, what he calls the raw stuff of legend. Though difficult to categorize, Jason's work often offers a highly original contribution to what we could call the Southwestern Ontario Gothic, a folk Gothic movement in Canadian writing that juxtaposes the seeming ordinary everydayness of the region with the potential horror and terror that lies beneath, or what Margaret Atwood describes as Souwesto's, and this is her words, considerable psychic murkiness and oddity. Jason is currently at work on a creative nonfiction collection of London and the area folklore, as well as its legends, that brings forward Gothic subjects and themes, like the uncanny, the supernatural, and other hauntings, which resurface memories of past traumas and events that have been lost, repressed, or largely forgotten in official histories of the region. Hopefully Jason can tell us a little bit about that book today too. But we'll see what he's willing to share of something that's still in the cone of silence, as I was calling it when we were talking about it. Earlier this year, Jason released his latest, My Gehenna, a collection of 60 spooky stories that range from replica hells to Bigfoot hunters to a Yeti paw to close encounters of the third kind, featuring demons, skinwalkers, murderers, and ghosts. Jason has described the series as a ghastly grab bag of horrors, reflecting the phobias and fascinations of its very strange author. Those are his words, not mine. Though I would compare the book to the experience of watching one of the old horror anthologies on television, like Tales from the Dark Side, if anybody remembers that series, Masters of Horror, or even the British Hammer House of Horror series, if anybody knows that one back to the 70s and 80s. Instead of Tales from the Crypt, we have Tales from Rip. As I was reading the series, I could just imagine the voice of the great Vincent Price reading them as a dramatic monologue in the style of Edgar Allan Poe. Over the next hour or so, we're going to explore Jason's new horror collection, as well as his fascination with the dark stories and legends of Souwesto. And we're going to take your questions in the chat in the webinar for those of you who are joining us online from distances afar, as well as questions from everybody here who's assembled in the space. So send along your cogitations and questions, and you can do that at any time online. You could do it telepathically here in the space, but we'll bring them up at the end as well. Jason Ripp is an award-winning playwright with exactly, as I mentioned, 100 full-length scripts to date. Though I wonder whether there's one lurking somewhere, but we'll find out maybe a little later on, including plays about Arthur Rimbaud, Edgar Allan Poe, Jack the Ripper, Wilhelm Reich, Roscoe Arbuckle, and more. He was the 2018 recipient of the Chris Doty Award for Lifetime Achievement in Theatre and a 2023 recipient of the London, Ontario Mayor's Honours List as a Distinguished Londoner. Please join me in welcoming Jason to Words to launch of sorts, second launch in London of his story collection, My Gehenna. Okay, so I thought I'd start with a documentary about you and your work titled Jason Ripp, A Tombstone Epitaph. And you remark in there, it's hard not to be macabre when you have a tombstone epitaph as a surname, Jason R.I.P. To start us off, I thought we could sketch out as best we can the genesis, or at least a history of your fascination with tales of the dark side. Has it always been an attention or a focus of your work?
When I was a child, I was clinically dead twice.
Oh, wow.
Once from Reye's syndrome, and once I decided it would be a good idea to swallow a weed into my lung. So I attribute a lot of, this is pre-memory for me, but I attribute a lot of my macabre nature to the fact that I've been to the other side, but regretfully I can't remember anything.
How old were you when these things happened?
Under 3.
Under 3, okay.
The first time it wasn't my fault, it was Reye's syndrome. The second time I decided to swallow a weed for some reason. So, and then I think they had to cut, I have a trach scar, I don't know if it's visible right now, but I think they decided to cut me open in the ambulance without anesthetic. So this is all what's told to me. I can't remember any of it, but I wasn't off to a good start, shall we say. And then somebody gave me an Edgar Allan Poe anthology at a very young age, and Poe's always been my guy. The very first story in My Gehenna is a tribute to Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And do you remember how old you were when you got the Edgar Allan Poe?
Somebody gave it to me like as an 8th birthday present. And I understood it too. I read it and I understood it. And of course I was in the age I am. I was into the hilarious House of Frightenstein.
Right.
And then very quickly after that, there was something called the Late Great Horror Show.
Oh, okay.
Came out of Erie, Pennsylvania. It was hosted by Jim Cook.
Wow.
I used to write Jim Cook letters. I loved the show so much. I think he's still alive. I checked I checked a few years ago. But then I would get all the great old horror movies like Attack of the Leech People, and but I'd also get the good horror movies like Black Sunday with Boris Karloff, and so I got into the horror genre very, very young.
Right. Wow, you were hooked right from immediate start. No, that's good. I even, in the documentary, you mentioned a Santa Claus picture that you had drawn that involved Santa.
Yeah, I spent some time at the school psychologist, so I decided it might be a good idea to draw a picture of Santa killing his reindeer. And there's quite a few reindeer, so there's quite a few ways to die. And I had to spend a little time talking about my feelings because of that. So. And
maybe brought the writer out of you as you were explaining to the psychologist all of the workings.
Why I write is because I really wasn't good at anything else. It took me so long to discover something that I was actually good at. So many of my school years were, failing at sports and failing at interacting with other humans, and to figure out I could write was really a godsend.
Yeah.
So,
Now your first illustrations were on the dark side. Was your first writing on the dark side as well?
Yeah, probably. I think I had an essay in high school. It was something about people chasing down caribou or something. I don't know, on a deer theme for some reason. But some people like getting naked and chasing caribou. That was like, and I did well. I got an A. So
there we go. Okay. Early start, a prodigy of the macabre right from the beginning.
I haven't really written about deer since, though. I don't know.
Well,
it's just
never too.
It got
late.
Exhausted early. So.
In the short documentary, you also mention you have an underlying interest in the story of the outsider. And this is to quote you, "That's what holds all my work together. It's about outsiders. It's about people who don't get a lot of exposure." As you'll see in my Gehenna, when you have a chance to purchase a copy, we have them here on sale, or get it online as well for people joining at home. Many of the stories are from the perspective of the downcast, the vulnerable, the outsiders, and the marginalized. What is it about these types of characters that attracts you as a writer?
Well, I obviously feel I'm of their company. I use writing to work out a lot of trauma. It's a steam valve for me. But I not only have I felt like I've never fit in, I've felt like I'm not of this time.
Okay.
So much of my work, it doesn't apply to my Gehenna because I made an attempt to write mostly contemporary stories, but I'm very much a 19th century person. I just identify with that period much, much more. So to be out of your time, it's kind of a strange feeling.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And you can see in the collection, the outsider definitely comes in. The 19th century is there too, right? So
I'll just give you an example.
Yeah.
When I was about 10, I invited 3 boys to my birthday party, and I didn't know any of them. Like, they were not my friends. I just
wow.
Sorry to trauma dump on you here, but
no. No, I mean, you can see it in the plays.
yeah, it all comes from that wounded little boy. A lot of it comes from that wounded little boy. So.
Right, and well, we're going to come back to this as well.
Yeah.
But children are a big theme in the volume as well, which ghost stories are often attracted or for that age of the childhood audience. But I think we'll come back and maybe I don't want to revisit trauma, but we'll come back to Jason the child and how this makes its way through. But I wanted to ask you about something in London. When I came to London, I first encountered Jason and his work with the Lost Soul Stroll. Does everybody remember the Lost Soul Stroll? What used to be a Halloween time production that would introduce the city of London to its haunted and spooky history. And I believe it started in 2005, if I'm correctly, and it ran for over 10 years with the London Fringe eventually. I imagine I speak for many folks when I say that I miss this annual tradition of London in the city here. Many who will know the Lost Soul Stroll here, but for those who don't know it, or for those at home who are experiencing this for the first time, or watching in posterity a video, could you tell us about the Lost Soul Stroll? How did it get started, and what was your role in creating
It was
this?
the brainchild of Christopher Doty, who's regretfully passed away many years ago. He approached me, knowing I had an interest in the macabre and knowing I had an interest in history, and it was definitely his idea. Yeah. The first couple years, I think we were the best ghost walk in Canada.
Wow.
Most ghost walks involve one costumed interpreter. This had an entire cast. And in the first couple years, we were using the actual locations. We gradually blew our privileges to do that, I think. But, like the Eldon House story was at Eldon House. Peg Leg Brown was at the Middlesex Courthouse. That was what was cool about it, was it was actually at the real locations where these stories happened.
Yeah. Did anyone in here had a chance to go on a Lost Soul Stroll? Oh my, look at it. That's, quite a few of the hands. There we go. Can you tell us about the process of putting it together? Because you were a writer from the beginning because it was written. It was a production.
It was fully scripted.
The actors would learn. So how did you go about building the Lost Soul Stroll?
Well, Don Flexer was the director. Again, a theatrical legend, Don Flexer. He was the director for the first year. I just picked what I thought were, the most interesting stories, kind of a nice combination between male and female performers. And the big ones. As the years went by, I had to get more obscure. I had to go looking. But there's ghost stories that every Londoner knows. Londoners know Ambrose Small. Londoners know Sarah Harris' ghost story. So I stuck to the very popular ones.
Right. But it also seemed to be, now, did you know a lot of this lore, or was it something that you had to dive into the research in order to...
I had to go to the London Room.
The London Room,
yeah,
okay, that was where was the mecca of all these stories that you could find?
Old newspapers on microfiche, a lot of it. So I knew something about most of the stories, but to get the dirt, you got to dig a little bit. So, yeah.
And you were a host?
I played Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, who wasn't in London for very long. but he did have one victim, one local victim named Kate Gardner. So Dr. Cream was, it's always interesting when a doctor kills. I have my own opinions about doctors, but this the God complex is not absent from it, shall we say. And that a lot of these guys think that they're cleansing the world of certain types of people. So I played Dr. Cream. Again, he's known internationally as a serial killer.
Before there was before the term serial killer even had.
Yeah, but his local kill was very early in the game. And he got out of town because although they couldn't convict him, his waiting room was kind of empty. People had their suspicions. So
right.
And it happened just across the street, too.
Did it really?
Yeah, just right across the street.
Wow, okay. And he used, his main crop, used strychnine, which was a really terrible way to die.
He's a different kind of serial killer in the sense that he doesn't want to watch. Yeah. He wants to be absent. So he would approach mostly sex workers, and he would say, "You have a bad complexion," or "It looks, I'm a doctor, you know, it looks like you might have the pox," and then he would slip them a pill that was supposed to cure that, and yeah, it would be strychnine. So.
Yeah. So these were some of the creatures you would find along the way on the Lost Soul Stroll that Jason and, as you say, the late great Chris Doty put together. One of the hosts of the stroll, and I believe you played this as well, is John Radcliffe.
John Radcliffe, the first professional executioner in Ontario.
Right, and also makes an appearance in My Gehenna. Could you tell us a little bit about John Radcliffe and how he became somebody who was interesting for you?
So many of the hangings in Southwestern Ontario were botched. It's really an area, I mean, we don't do it anymore, but it's really an area where you want somebody with skill, because it can go wrong both ways, and this is all in my myth book. You can pop the person's head off. That happened in Woodstock with a fellow named Thomas Cook, or more painfully, they can throttle. So there's a perfect height to drop a person that will break their neck. And it hardly ever happens until they get John Radcliffe, because he's a pro.
He's a pro, right? The first professional hangman.
He learned from a guy named Marwood in England, and he apprenticed. And he might have hanged 200 people total. And it really did affect him. He was haunted by nightmares. And he was profoundly alcoholic, but just the voices screaming at him in the night and seeing the faces of all the people he'd hanged. He died relatively young. The funny part is you don't hang somebody every day. You know, it's not something that you're going to have to show up at work every day and check in. Yeah. So he was like a waiter at a Toronto yacht club.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, and every now and then somebody'd be like, "Aren't you the hangman?"
Serving my
I don't want the pina colada. You know, your hands are stained. So that's Radcliffe in a nutshell.
Right, and for the readers of My Gehenna, you will see an encounter and a nice twist on the story too. So I'll be I'm going to try and watch for as many spoiler alerts as I can, and I'll try to keep clear of doing those as we go along. But I'll let Jason, if he feels compelled.
Well, there's 60 stories. We can spoil a couple.
We can spoil a couple. That's true. As I was reading through the book, I was struck by the number of times that I wondered whether the story I was reading was based, at least in part, on historical events or an historical figure. And then I went to Google, and sure enough, more often than not, when I was curious, I found that there was some historical thread underlying the story. The final story, for example, Jimmy Stewart, Tom Slick, and the Yeti Paw was wild. I did a bit of a deep dive looking into that. How did you find the historical kernels for these stories, or did they find you?
Some of the stories I repurposed from a novel I wrote called The Cabinet. So The Cabinet was about a demon who had accepted Christianity, and he was sort of a curator of a storage facility for the Vatican, and it was full of lockers. So every time you opened up a locker, there would be some weird object in there. It was all about haunted objects.
Okay.
So some of my stories I took right out of that and put them in my Gehenna because I haven't published the cabinet yet. So yeah, the Yeti hand was, Jimmy Stewart actually stole a Yeti hand from a monastery. The Jimmy Stewart, the one you all know and love.
Aw shucks, Jimmy Stewart.
He put it in his wife's suitcase and covered it up with her underwear, and then figured customs wouldn't dare touch the underwear of Jimmy Stewart's wife. And he did it because he thought, oh, we need to study this. Right. I mean, it's still theft from monks, but he's saying we need to study this in America where we have proper diagnostic facilities. But yeah, it really happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so many of the other historical figures in there, were they also from the novel as something that you could mine for stories?
I think there's a mixture. I really tried to write some contemporary stuff because I hardly ever do. And then I relied on Reddit. Because every weirdo thing that ever happened to anybody goes on Reddit. And it's just a statement. And I would just take that statement and I would make a full story out of it.
Yeah. And objects is interesting as well, the way in which stories attach to objects. Because there are objects, a lot of objects.
Yeah, you got to be careful what you buy at Goodwill. No, there's a lot of thought that spirits can get into dolls. There's a whole Japanese tradition that if an object is 100 years old, it acquires a soul. So yeah, the haunted objects is a thing for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And there definitely are haunted objects, and maybe we'll hear about one later on in the hour as well.
Like that, they've made so many movies about, what's her name, Annabelle.
Yeah.
That's based on a real haunted Raggedy Ann doll. So.
And so many iterations of the Annabelle series, yeah. And a new one comes out and you're not sure, and then of course you'll see one of the actors that comes through. Yeah, no, that's true.
Loosely based in fact, as they say.
Yeah. There are 60 stories, as you say. Did you set out to write a collection of spooky stories, or did you have stories along the way, and then you started to realize, oh, this could be a collection?
Yeah, I'd been writing them for some time. I mean, I spent so much time writing plays. That was my thing for many decades. But I'd always, I'd written, some of them go back 30 years, some of those stories.
Oh, wow.
Some of them are short plays.
So 30, so the stories that are in...
A few of them.
And pick up the book too and show everybody the cover. So a few of them go back all the way of 30 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then some of them are plays,
Yeah.
like short plays, because I did a series called Frights of Spring for many years, and that was encouraging myself and other playwrights to write very short, macabre pieces. Sometimes it'd be 4 of them, sometimes it'd be 10 of them. But every time I wrote one of those short plays, I turned it back into a story, and it's in my Gehenna.
Oh, wow. How long does it take you to write one of the stories? I mean, it varies, I imagine, but what roughly the amplitude of time that it took you to...
I wouldn't say these are very long short stories. Some of it gets towards what they call microfiction. Like, I can do it in one sitting, but I like to sit there and think about where it's going and how it ends. And then I can probably do it all at once.
Wow. So one sitting a day, is it...
a couple hours. I mean, I do edit, believe it or not. I mean, I do go back and try to polish it and make it better, but it's good. It's good in some ways to just sort of crap it all out at once, and then you have a first draft, and then you can look at what needs to be improved.
Yeah.
So.
The number 60, was that a round number, or was there some significance to getting to 60?
I think I had like 52, and then I was like, I can't. My OCD can't handle 52. I got to bump it up to an even number. So, yeah,
for sure. And
I should have gone 66 because that's getting close to 666.
Then your OCD would just drive you all the way to 666, and you'd be right.
Well, yeah. Wrap it up by the 2030s. If I'm still around.
Some of the stories in the collection have a literary source to them, which I can't help but mention with words, the Literary and Creative Arts Festival. For example, you've created a prose retelling of Horace's Epode 5, a poem worthy of Shakespeare's Macbeth. Could you talk about how this adaptation came about for you and how it made it into the collection?
My best friend who's here tonight, Tyler Miller, he can speak ancient languages.
Oh, the translator,
Yeah. So he did this. It was for one of the Frights of Spring. I was asking him, what is like the earliest like creepy story that you've heard of? He's a classic scholar, so he knows these things. And it was Horace. Apparently the other epodes are not quite like this, but I found this story, which is of hags trying to take the liver out of a child.
Yeah.
I found it kind of suited to my
For-
purposes.
for-
For a love potion.
For a love potion. Right?
So I'm like, that was creepy then, and it's creepy now. So it actually got performed as a short play, as part of one of the Frights of Spring. But I found it very, very macabre.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's very dark.
And the child fights back. The child is like, I am going to haunt you, damn hags. You're going to kill me now, but I'm going to get you in your sleep. I'm going to rake you with my claws. Like the child, the victim fights back.
Yeah.
And so for being such an ancient thing, it's very resonant.
Wow. And Tyler's here today. Where's
He's
Tyler?
selling books at the back.
Oh, he's
there.
selling.
Yeah,
One of the
yeah.
sales associates. I love it. There we
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Very, very cool. Well, and it's a great segue to a question I wanted to ask you about, which pulls us back to something I mentioned earlier. We often think of folk tales as children's stories, though we forget just how gruesome some of the early fairy tales really are, like the Brothers Grimm. I mean, when you think of a story like Little Red Riding Hood, in its original incarnation, it is dark. It is a very, very dark story.
What a lot of people don't know about Little Red Riding Hood, it's clearly a werewolf because it can speak. It has like great big blue eyes. These are signs of a traditional werewolf.
Right.
So that never clued in when I was a kid. I mean, I found it very, very grim, particularly when the woodsman involved. I believe he slits the wolf's belly open, and Grandma comes out still unscathed.
Yeah.
Although he probably goes to anger management now, considering how PC we are right now. But
can you imagine giving that to a child in terms of being a story that would be, hold some kind of moral or parable in terms of misbehavior?
the one that I'll never forget was called the Juniper Tree.
Okay.
And again, stepmoms always get it really bad and
They
treated
really
really bad. But she basically murders her stepson by slamming his head in a bread box. So there's an out-and-out murder in it. And then the kid becomes a bird and gets her back by dropping a stone right on her head. It's called the Juniper Tree. It's got a reputation for being the darkest of the Grimm's fairy tales, which are already pretty dark.
Pretty dark.
Yeah.
And there's something about innocence and nostalgia around childhood that allows for magic and the supernatural to appear. Could you talk about the place of children's stories and how children's play enters into the book? And I'm thinking of, Agatha and Esther in the bucket, but there's also Myron and I think it's John or Oddball Johnny. But there's all sorts of children that make their way through some of the stories.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I don't like children. And I made a point to not have any. I was pretty...
in life, not
in life. But yeah, the younger they are, the more I think that they know something about
that's an uncanny child.
about the layers of the universe. So babies, particular, babies have a knowing look, and I think they're basically saying, "Why the hell did you take me out of the spirit world, where I was happy and content?" But yeah, I mean, I'm not the only one who finds children creepy. Right. I mean, that's all over horror fiction. All the way from babies to, Carrie age when they're in high school. But yeah, children and dolls, guaranteed creepy most of the time.
For sure.
Yeah.
And children are throughout the collection. There's no doubt about that. And you put them to good effect. One of the figures that appears on a few occasions in the collection, and I mentioned in your biography that we talked about this a little bit beforehand, is the shadowy figure Jack the Ripper. Mm-hmm. But you've put some very interesting new twists in the mix to give us a new perspective on Jack. One in particular that I will only tease at because it will be a spoiler to say too much. What is it about the figure of Jack the Ripper that attracts you in your writerly brain?
Well, it's still unsolved, and no matter who claims to have solved it, it's an unsolved, and it never will be solved. Really, we have to talk about why Jack the Ripper is such a big deal in our collective psyche. Part of it is that it's unsolved, but he's also the first modern serial killer. Right. Whether it's right or proper to put serial killers on a pedestal, probably not, but certainly there's a fascination. And again, his time is right around the time of, people reading newspapers every day. So with
Right.
5 or 6 victims, he's not a serial killer that ranks, really. But because he's the first modern serial killer, coincides with media becoming a big deal. That's why we're talking about him.
Right, and Dr. Cream at one point was thought to potentially have been.
Well, here's the thing about London, and I don't even get into the 1960s, but the thing about London is we have 3 Jack the Ripper suspects. None of them likely.
London, Ontario.
London, Ontario.
Wow.
Because there's not only Thomas Neal Cream, who we talked about, there's Francis Tumblety, a very eccentric guy who was actually in Whitechapel and
Wow.
killed at least one person that we know of. And then we have the Listowel Ripper.
Oh, okay.
One of the most terrible cases. His last name was Chattel, but he was a huge, hairy man that killed a 13-year-old in Listowel. And people thought, this guy's got it. They sent pictures of him to England to people who had allegedly seen Jack. So there's 3. There's 3 possible candidates for Jack the Ripper. None of them likely at all.
Well, and that anticipates our designation, as you say, as murder city of the world.
And I was careful to avoid that. There's already many, many books about that. And even in my mythology book, I cut it off with the canceled Rolling Stones concert in 1965 because I did not want to get into that. I just felt it's already been covered. Same reason I don't do the Donnellys in this mythology book. It's just been covered so much. So,
Yeah, for sure. Could we hear Little Jack?
sure, you can hear Little Jack.
This is one of the stories in the collection that I was mentioning. It gives us a new perspective on Jack the Ripper and Ripperology.
I didn't think I was the kind of person who would do this, by the way. I remember I posted on social media at one point, even I can't go here, but I ended up going there.
I'm glad you did.
I think that the twist will take care of itself. So, the papers have christened me Jack. I speak through my deeds and would never have thought of giving myself a name. What I must concentrate on is evading Scotland Yard and continuing to harvest these slatterns who like nothing better than to begrime a good man, to tempt him into muddying his marriage. Without these syphilis-ridden sirens, he would continue to be a kind husband and father. These Liliths of the night make him give it all up to get his weed wet. You can't blame my background for it. I'm afraid I am a natural evil, independent of upbringing. I'm not even sure that you can call me evil, really. I'm more of a cleaner, a specialist in public sanitation. Not only did I have a kind father, I had 2. There was my birth father, an overworked, overloving man, and there was the good old man who paid for the treatment of my illness. I was dependent on crutches when I was a lad, hobbling everywhere I went. I'm grateful that my mobility issues were rectified. Otherwise, I could never have attained the stealth that I depend on now. Last night, I killed my 4th. We snuggled in a dark corner off Burner Street, and I just started putting my knife into her. If I do it correctly, and I am a perfectionist, she won't have time to release a scream, and no one will come to help her. I wiped the blood from my boot soles and left her a lifeless lump. Any passerby would think that she was sleeping off the drink. Who could be capable of such an act? Like I told you, there's no point looking for clues in my early years. My family knew great hardship. At one point, it was suspected that I should die through lack of medicine, want of care. Circumstances seemed very bleak, even though both my mother and father were bone-tired with work. I remember the very moment when everything changed for us. Our benefactor sent us a giant goose. Oh, the taste of that succulent meat. Christmas has always been a cherished time of year for me, even though I am as cold-hearted as they come. I have vowed not to kill any slatterns during those sacred 12 days. It's possible that they too could have grieving relatives, people who care for them. I shall nest in the best boarding house I can afford and wait for less festive times. When Uncle Ebenezer died, it was said that nobody kept Christmas quite like him. I cried at his funeral. It was the last time I ever cried. Even after I was able to burn my crutches, Even after I was able to scamper in the streets, I did not lose my innocence right away. Jack came with the onset of lust. I needn't tell you what I used to be called. I'm Jack now.
Did everybody get it? Everybody get the switch
It's
there?
an awful thing to do.
Not Tiny Tim. Very nice, very nice. Many of the stories really bear the stamp of the playwright's touch. And as you mentioned, that's their genesis, often with the structure of a monologue or a dramatic monologue. The stories have a knack of pulling the reader into the world of what we might call the unreliable narrator, or that first-person point of view, especially in borderline cases where the protagonists take us into the dark arts of murder and madness. While remaining mindful of spoilers, of course, I wonder if you could talk about how you, as a writer, get into the mind of a murderer, or for that matter, a ghost.
Well, I already talked about my Poe inspiration,
Yes.
and that's what Poe
Yes.
is known for. Almost always a first-person narration, almost always an unstable narrator. In terms of getting into the mindset, I haven't killed anyone, but I'm pretty intense, I would say. Like I said, I need the writing as a steam valve, and I need the writing as therapy. So, and I come from an acting background, so I'm used to being. I think most gifted actors are the ability to actually become other people. If you can do it well, if you have that kind of chameleon thing. It's not necessarily comes from psychological health, shall we say. So I think Hollywood bears that up a little bit too, in terms of people who we were talking about Billy Bob Thornton earlier, but people who are really, really good actors. There's that ability to really put on another skin,
Right.
And that's something a writer has to do as well. So.
Yeah, and the characters, as you go along, you can even feel it in the story that we heard of the slow clues and reveals, and you have to, whether we're trusting the narrators giving us everything, so we have to kind of read almost between and beyond, and is what I'm getting the truth? Where do I have to bring myself into the story? Mm-hmm. And it does come with that sensibility of the playwright, which I love as I was reading them. Because the stories have that structure of monologue, there's a very theatrical quality to them. And like good ghost stories, they reward the opportunity to hear them read aloud. And you gave us the gift of reading one with a nice twist there at the end. I wonder if we could hear another, and maybe this one, I think we talked a little bit about a piece of the...
It's a longer one, yeah.
Longer one, but
so
no,
I'll just give you a snippet.
Yeah, let's get a snippet of this.
This is the titular story. This is my Gehenna, the story. Because I won't get to finish it, it's my tribute to Poe, and it's about somebody making an artificial hell in their basement, like a clockwork hell. So instead of damned souls, they have like mice that they use. But it's just about, I've seen some documentaries about outsider artists that I've never been able to forget. One was called In the Realm of the Unknown, about Henry Darger. But there are people, and maybe I was feeling a little unappreciated when I wrote this story. Things are much better now, but it's someone who devotes their whole life to a piece of art that no one will ever see, or only the one chosen person will see. This has happened many, many times. There was a guy who built this entire shrine in his garage that he spent all of his time working on. All you have to do is look up outsider artists, and you'll get this. But my Gehenna is somebody trying to make a clockwork hell in their basement. I'll just do the first couple paragraphs.
Brilliant.
When you die, or when I die for that matter, there will be a brief moment, the moment of the stopped heart and the unnourished brain, when we are nowhere. Shortly after that, our soul's eyes will open in the presence of a companion, one who has been with us all of our lives. Everyone starts off with an angel, but through the long process of life, this angel is often dismissed and replaced with a fiend. A fiend was once an angel, and it remembers the drill. It just doesn't have your well-being in mind. You may see flickers of this companion during your lived days, eye-corner approximations, but in death, you will stare it full in the face. It will be your escort through eternity. If it's an angel, you will be filled with a feeling of the purest love, like a bladder is filled with warm water. But if it's not an angel, you will feel the fear that will be with you forever, now that you've stepped beyond the mercy of the Lord. If you are gently taken by the hand, it's an angel. If you are dragged by a claw, it is another. God cannot help you now. You are this demon's servant. Damnation is no metaphor, and the kindest of the clergy are wrong to tell you so. I'm not yet dead myself, although the remainder of my life will be of short duration. I am a watchmaker by profession, although I haven't worked on a watch in years, not since the great preoccupation commanded my attention. My life's passion project presented itself to me in a curious way. I've always been leery of women. I was a bachelor of 36 when I first met that tarnished priest, that backslider. He gave me the stone, the window stone, as payment for a repair, and then, no more than an hour later, judging by police estimates, he tossed himself and his newly repaired watch into the Arve River. I do not know if his priestly deeds could keep him out of my model, but I do know that if he's trapped within, he lives down at the 7th level among the trees that cut themselves down. Man, that's all exposition. I haven't even started the plot yet.
But we get one of those objects, right, that we were talking about before, that objects end up orienting good ghost stories. The window stone. How did the window stone become something that orients this story?
I think that's a big part. Yeah, it's to scry with. So I don't want to pick on any one religion, but certainly some religions are more into scrying than others. I believe the Bible mentions Human and Thuman. There's two scrying stones, but it's basically a crystal ball, except of a natural kind. Because this my narrator inherits this, it shows him what hell looks like. He also has read Dante.
Yeah.
I'm really, really into Dante, although you only want to read the first book. As soon as things get better for the narrator, it loses appeal to me. But hell is mapped out like Disneyland, there's whatever sin you did, there's a section for you. And then when you go all the way to the bottom, there's Satan himself inverted in a sea of ice, chewing on the three great traitors, Judas and Brutus, and so it's very specific. Yeah. So when he's making his hell, he knows there's a lot of Dante.
There is. Well, the narrator describes himself as the devil's cartographer, which is kind of what Dante's Inferno does with that reverse conical.
Yeah, and so much of what we think about hell is from Dante. It's the Bible says weeping and gnashing of teeth.
How we visualize it is very much Dante.
Yeah, and according to at least, I'm not unfamiliar with the Bible, it's a place of darkness, and it's a place where God can't reach you. Mm-hmm. And that's about all the Bible has to say about it.
Right.
Weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's the one everybody,
Yeah, and when somebody says they're referring to, I'm in whatever circle of hell, they're making a Dante reference.
It's a Dante
of the
reference,
circles of hell, and there's Virgil being the guide that takes through, and this narrator's kind of a guide that's taking us through hell.
Yeah, the first level of hell is just windy. It's not too bad. It's for the virtuous pagans and for the unbaptized babies. So it's not too bad. It's just a lot of wind. You just you gotta dress for it.
For sure. Gehenna is also a place. It's a topical name too, right? Gehenna is like I think it's Ben Gehenna. It refers to the slope outside of Mount Zion. So there's actually like a physical place, and then it more metaphorically transfers over to the underworld to describe. It's another name for hell, in other words.
Yeah, it's a better title than My Hell.
No, it's great. I liked it a lot. I mean, the first story is terrific, and it does set the tone for the rest of the...
When I was sending stories to various publications, that was the one that always came back. I wish we could publish this, but it's either too much or it doesn't fit our mandate. But I got so many apologies for that story. So made me think it might be a good story.
There we are.
Yeah.
Yes, it's getting new life. And thank you for giving us a snapshot to it as well. It's a nice introduction. And it's a good link to a question about place that I want to ask you. And it's maybe a little bit of a shifting gears to maybe explore some of this work that is yet to come. But it also links to this as well. In that short documentary that I referred to at the top of Jason, he remarks that, and this is Jason's words, "I feel like I'm in grain now, and I feel like this is my town." Looking over your body of work, especially the plays, I would venture to say that you seem almost haunted by a sense of place, by this place, by London. And I imagine your writerly brain, this is the way that I think of Jason's writerly brain. You remember in the Ghostbusters, the PKE meter that Egon Spengler has, where he goes around tracking ghosts? That's Jason's writerly brain and its ability to home in on the stories that haunt this sense of place of this.
Yeah, there's not too much I haven't covered at
You
this point.
found all of these through that writerly. Could you talk about how place, especially those darker places, inform your writing practice? London really does seem to be firmly centered in your core.
I guess unlike a lot of my peers, I never left. So now I feel like I did use the word ingrained, but I feel like a big bloated fish in a small pond, to tell you the truth. And as long as there's corn to eat, I will eat that corn. But I'm ambiguous about London, and I feel like the London of my youth is no longer here. Regretfully, I have plans to retire to Paris, Ontario, when I do retire, because I freaking love Paris, Ontario. That's my Mayberry. Like, everybody's got a smile on their face. Everybody says hi to you. But
Right.
I'm not going to say I'm stuck in London. I just have an ambiguous relationship with London,
Right.
and I feel like London has seen its better days.
Right. But when you go to Paris, you'll be haunted by London. The ghosts of London will
Well,
visit
it's just
you in
up the
Paris.
highway. I can come. I can come back.
There's
London is a bit of a vortex, though. There's a lot of dark. Like I said, 3 Jack the Ripper suspects. There's a lot of dark things that happened in this town.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes ghosts and water have a connection. So maybe it's the fact that we have so many waterways and so many. There is a connection between ghosts and water, believe it or not.
Right.
So-
When you write about the stories, is it all archival work, or do you get that aura of going down to the Roman line, or going, you mentioned earlier that the building of where Dr. Cream, do you go to the spaces and see if you can feel the aura when you're writing?
Yeah, that always really moves me. We were talking about Tyler Miller earlier. We went to see Thomas Talbot's grave just like a week ago,
Oh, okay.
and I had never been there. And it's kind of out of the way. It's in a little Anglican cemetery. And I'd written, one of my most successful plays is called An Upper Canada Christmas Carol, and it should have made me $1 million. I don't know why it didn't. Because everybody loves local history, and everybody loves the Christmas. So
Yeah.
it combines the two. It should have made my fortune, but for some reason it didn't. But just to be at Thomas Talbot's grave, which for whatever reason I never got out there, it was very, very moving. I can walk up and down this Dundas Street, and I know like maybe 12 to 15 macabre tales that have just happened on this street alone. So London is my stomping grounds, and London will always be, my hometown. So, and enough stuff has happened here that it can be chronicled. There's so many things happened here. So.
Right. At the top of the hour, I mentioned that you're in the process of writing a kind of folk history, and it in manuscript form. It feels almost like a kind of folk Gothic history of Southwestern Ontario that you're calling Souwesto Noir, and I was lucky enough to have a chance to read through the draft manuscript, where you call it a book of legends rather than a history. Could you talk about the project and what possessed you to write a folk history of Southwestern Ontario?
I wanted to do some nonfiction. I'd never done it before. A book like this doesn't exist.
Right.
And once I got into it, I had no idea there would be 200 legends. Now, it's not just London, it's Souwesto. So there's nothing from Toronto, but, Kitchener-Waterloo is fair game, and Guelph is fair game. And I just kept accumulating stories, more and more and more. I thought for a long time I wouldn't have to do citations, but I ended up doing citations, which took almost another year.
Yeah.
So it's a true nonfiction. I mean, I'm dealing with legends, so some of them obviously didn't happen, but there's usually a little grain of truth there. But yeah, it was the desire to write something that was nonfiction. It was trying to fill a gap that like a book like this isn't there.
Right.
And then, man, so many weird, quirky things happened in this area.
Yeah. Can you think of an example of something that would have, along the way of writing this, that you discovered that you didn't know? Or,
Well, one of the ones that
quirky?
may or may not be true is that we had a magnetic lady. So her name was Carolyn Clare, and she came down with a terrible stomach ailment. She was only 17, but when she woke up, she was magnetic. So this is no way to live. Like, knives are coming at you. Apparently, when she went to church, she would shock the priest when he put the wafer on her tongue. And then one day it went away. Now, there's some other legends to this effect. Apparently, at Sing Sing prison, there was people got magnetic from food poisoning. But the more likely explanation is it's an old circus trick, where people who are exceptionally greasy, people who have a lot of what would you say, sweat a lot, or have they can stick things to their face,
Right.
and claim to be magnetic. But Carolyn Clare, I could find no real proof of her existence. So it might be one of those categories of legends that just travels.
Yeah.
We're seeing this a lot in the modern period of urban legends.
Yep.
So everything up to like a mutilation of a child in a mall, that was said to have happened at Masonville, even though it happened every mall in every state and it was just a traveling urban legend.
Yeah.
And one much earlier was called the Brantford Blacksmith, and that turns out to be an old Scottish legend that was
Right.
just relocated. It's about your wife turning into a horse at night. So there wasn't a lot of like lycanthropy stories in this. There was one werewolf story out of Pesh Island, and there was one werehorse story out of Brantford. But
The werewolf.
your wife turns into a horse at night, and then you accidentally shoe her because you're a blacksmith. You see where this is going, right?
Yeah.
She wakes up with the enforced stigmata, right? So, but that was, I found clearly that was from Scotland, that was imported, and let's put it in Brantford.
Right.
So,
And you, in the opening pages, or in the opening page, you describe occupying this, I think you call it the fertile gap between pure history and legend, which is interesting because it's not the domain of the pure historian. This is, I think, one of the things that does, as you're absolutely right, that we don't have a history like this, that occupies this zone. But I imagine it's tricky for that to be the selection criteria, to have this almost vibration between what's purely historically documented and what could end up being disproven or thrown away.
Right.
How did you end up, how did that criteria work itself out in the writing?
I felt I wasn't going to be under a historian's obligations, but then I came to feel like I was.
Yeah, with citations.
Because I was getting the material from other sources.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, a legend is normally a little bit of both.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of fact, and then it gets a lot of hyperbole. So,
Right. And it's, when the fact becomes or when the legend becomes fact, print the legend.
there's a lot of things people believe that just have no basis in fact. Like, I remember George Washington's cherry tree.
Right.
Never happened.
Right.
But yeah, there's tons of things like that. So,
Well, it's a brilliant read. I've learned so much reading through the book.
so hopefully somebody publishes it.
Yeah. Out there, anybody watching live or in posterity.
You'll make a lot of money. You only have to give me a tiny bit.
The great novelist and playwright of Southwestern Ontario, I mentioned this earlier when we were talking before, Robertson Davies used to say, "I know the dark folkways of my people," a knowledge that he would bring into his unique style of storytelling. Now that you've had a chance to survey the folk dark ways of Souwesto, do you think that Southern Ontario has a unique folk noir, folk horror, folk gothic tradition in our collected stories, whether they're seen or unseen, invisible, visible?
I've never tried to do this in Massachusetts, or I've never tried to do this in Wyoming. I'm sure every place has their stories. I will say London has a very, very strong epicenter of Souwesto in terms of its stories. London has just so many stories. I definitely could have written a book just about London,
Yeah.
but I expanded, did other things. So.
Right. I felt, it's interesting that you say that Paris, Ontario is calling at some point, but when I was reading through, I thought, wow, this is a gold mine for a writer like Jason. Like, it's 200 stories here that you've collected that could potentially be expanded out into whether it's plays or otherwise. Is this something that's pulling, after you've written this book and you have these stories there, do they call to you, write me, turn me into bigger
There was
stories?
only one that I thought, I regret I am not going to do a play about, and it was the story of Clara Peters, who is like this 300-pound African-Canadian woman who could just kick butt. Like she wasn't a professional boxer because they wouldn't allow her to be a professional boxer, but she could take any man and did, and kind of worked as a bouncer. And eventually she got killed by the police in Detroit. But I was like, this is such a story at a time where women don't have, and people of color don't have a lot of privilege. But again, maybe that's not my story to write right now, but any playwright out there, Clara Peters is her name.
Right.
That was the only one that called to me, that I'm like, this would be such a good play.
Yeah.
Because again, I could give a part to somebody where they get to beat up men the whole time, wearing a skirt. So.
But you immediately go to plays. I'm thinking, would you be interested in writing this into a revisiting the novel form, where you clearly have that restless creativity that has pulled you into writing the Souwesto noir? Is this a vein? I'm trying to ask this question. One of the questions you never ask an author after they've published a book is, what are you writing next? Because, give them an hour to celebrate the work that they've just given to the world. But there's a part of me that thinks that these stories have this ability to produce all sorts of
The thing about a novel is it takes you years.
Right.
So I'm working on something. It is Souwesto. It's about the Boer War.
Oh.
And it was inspired by that big green statue in Victoria Park that I'd walked by a million times and never really stopped and looked at what was engraved on it. And on the one side, it's six local men who died in the Boer War. And I'm like, nobody's talking about that. Everybody walks by that statue all the time. Nobody thinks about it. The Boer War is so forgotten. World War I eclipses it. And I wanted to write about the Boer. I'm of Dutch heritage, so I'm like, the Boers held off the biggest army in the world for three years with no organized army, just militia. So I'm like, if America decides to invade us, that's what's going to happen. We're going to have to go Boer. we're going to have to retreat to the hills and sneak attack as much as possible. So it's more timely than 1901 when it takes place. So.
Yeah, attack us again. 1812 is in the noir book, and there's I think Reservoir Hill is the space that used to have or has a potential story there of the Americans coming down.
People call it Snake Hill,
or
call it Reservoir. Everybody's driven down it in Byron area. Yeah,
it's right across the road from Springbank Park.
Yeah, apparently there was a big battle there. And there was our own local Florence Nightingale or Laura Secord. There was a lady who was doing most of the grunt work and
medical attention. And
so very, very Florence Nightingale story.
Yeah. Questions. I'm going to turn to you in just a second. So, and online, if you have any questions, we can put it in the Q&A, and I'll pick those up as well. I just have another question here, and then I'm going to come to you and get some questions and comments here. Have you ever seen some of these stories turning into television, like I would love that. Tales from the Rip?
There's definitely a creep show element. And creep shows was really important in my development.
Oh, how so? Was it something that you?
Well, I just was the right age. Like I was about 12 when Creep Show came out, and then the second one's not bad, and the third one's awful. So just watch the first two. But
there's a new one that just came out. Right?
I'm really ambiguous about Stephen King, but I can't deny his influence on me. I would say Stephen King is a great storyteller, but not a great stylist. But I mean, he's way more successful than me, so who cares what I think, right? But
and prolific.
But I mean, and he makes so much money. I'm like, I like to be as marketable as Stephen King. Yeah.
Wouldn't we all like to be as marketable as Stephen King? I am going to go over and get another microphone here, so just a second. But do we have any questions or comments? 1 second. I saw a hand right here. Yep.
It isn't really a question, Jason. It's more of a comment. My wife and I lived in Paris for 19 years, and I can assure you that when you go there, you will find a pretty rich mother lode of weirdness. in the history of Paris.
Just got to get off Main Street, eh?
Which you probably already have an inkling of. It may not be as concentrated or as rich as London, but Paris, for a community its size, has its share of stuff.
I'm actually reading a novel right now that takes place in Paris, Ontario, and it's about the labor strike at the textile mill. I can't remember It's great. It's a really, really good novel, but it takes place in Paris, and terrible things are happening. So, yeah. Jim
Hunt, used to be a sports writer who's now deceased. He used to on a sports radio program. He always used to comment about how he covered the Paris mill strike in like the 50s or whenever it was. And he always made light of it, but it was a strong memory for him.
Right, and the factory's now a lovely little market.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or condos. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think I saw one up here. Just grab that and ask your question.
Jason, will you tell us about the cover of your book?
That is, I plan on doing this for all my future releases. That is my niece, CC Rip, who is a graphic artist. A little bit of nepotism, but I think she deserves it. I really like her art. That is one of the inhabitants of my Gehenna. That is a clockwork demon, or her interpretation of a clockwork demon. I just said, draw me a clockwork demon. So that's what's on the cover.
Thank you.
Great question. That was really good. Yeah, come around here and give you that.
Mr. Rip, I just wondered, what are some of your personal favorite macabre books and films and albums, and what are some things that you get a personal kick out of in terms of dark material?
I love every single Hammer film. I'm so much into Hammer movies. The British seem to just really know how to do it. I think in terms of film, horror is in a bit of a golden age right now, though. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing that new Jeffrey Rush, John Lithgow film about the dementia doll creating trouble. It looks great. I loved Longlegs. I like a lot of the more recent films. I think are really great. And I think Hollywood is awful right now, but I think horror is, as a genre, is having a bit of a heyday right now. So.
Thank God for A24.
Mm-hmm.
I think Sarah's cueing me that there's a question online, so let me just see if I can read this here. Okay, so, hi Jason, I'm curious about any historical or legendary witches associated with London, Ontario. Have you come across any intriguing stories or figures in your research or writing about witches?
I can do that. It's St. Thomas, but there's a legend there, Maria Ermatinger. So if you go to the old Pioneer Cemetery in St. Thomas, there's a big, black, unique-looking grave with chains around it, and that is called the Witch's Grave. So sometimes you're supposed to see a black cat named Spook that kind of hangs around. The legend's going to take me a while. I'll try to summarize it as quickly as possible. The witch's son went out boating. She told him not to go. He went out with his family called the Chisholms. The kid drowned. The witch cursed the Chisholms and said, none of your children will ever die in their beds. The Chisholms' grave is back further in the Pioneers Cemetery, and it's a very elaborate grave. But the true Maria Ermatinger was just a woman who died in childbirth. And the fact that her grave, her granite grave, turned black, it was just oxidizing. But people made up this legend out of whole cloth. I mean, the woman's name is real, but people made up this legend of her being a witch out of whole cloth just because her grave turned black. It turns out all the graves from this company turn black because that's just what. So, but it's a great example of how a story can just emerge from next to nothing, and be completely manufactured.
Yeah, wow. I'm bummer about learning that all the graves made by that company just turned black.
They oxidized.
Other questions, comments for Jason? Anything online? Yeah.
So Jason, if you were to create an urban legend that you wanted people to believe about London.
I've done it, yeah.
what would that be? Because I want to start the rumors.
I used to be a camp counselor, and I really took a lot of, I told you I have a mixed feelings towards children, so I usually like to scare them, so I'd make up stuff, as camp counselors tend to do. Funny thing is, it's gone from ghosts to serial killers. Almost all, the kids get the serial killer legend now, they don't get the ghosts. But in my book, there's somebody called Anson Miner who's supposed to haunt every campground and at a certain point. But I made up a legend called the Bean Squatch. And the Bean Squatch is a tiny Sasquatch, and it lives in soybean fields. And you think it's well, it's not harmless because it's more like a Tasmanian devil or something. It'll bite you. It's actually much more vicious than a regular Sasquatch. They seem kind of gentle and gorilla-like. This is more like a baboon. So the Bean Squatch was something I told the kids. I also told them that Elvis was like living in the woods. And then we dressed up one of the counselors as Elvis, and at a campfire, he ran out. And this is scary. It's not, what's scary is the children attacked him. So they kind of ripped his sequined suit off, and he fled. But I was like, the children were way more scary than the Elvis. And you're not supposed to be scared of Elvis. Elvis is great. So, yeah. But yeah, I've made up urban legends.
For anybody? If you're talking to, let me just get to this microphone here. If you're talking to young playwrights or younger emerging writers, and they ask you about the tradition of the Gothic or the noir, the folk histories here, would you see this as being something that has its unique style and it's a new future for the stories of the macabre coming from Southwestern Ontario? What do you think the future is for this kind of genre of writing and for this, almost like this mythology of our region?
The thing about theater, which I'm really not an active theater artist anymore, but the thing about theater is it's so immediate. So if you do something, and it hardly ever gets done, horror is so neglected in theater. There's things like Wait Until Dark, that's quite a popular play that's supposed to be scary. But if things are happening right at your feet, so to speak, it's terrifying. I've seen people flipped the heck out by a play that's scary because it's like right there. I mean, there's people who can't get through a movie without, biting their nails or flinching, but to have it happen right in front of you, there's a lot of potential. Because to be scary is the goal, If people are laughing at your horror, that's not good, unless it's a blend. Right. Like American Werewolf in London. I love that friggin' movie. It's so funny and so terrifying.
Yeah. Amazing. Any other questions, comments for Jason? Well, I see one. Phil Donahue, I'm going to run to you.
Given how much your work centers local history and local legends, I'm wondering if you can expand on your research process in order to find these stories. And, I'm sure many people send you stories at this point, but what's that process look like?
I rely a lot on the London Room. I don't know if people work their way up to the third floor, but they're extremely helpful. Arthur and his staff will find you kind of what you're looking for. There's definitely a ghost file. Like there's a file of all previous articles about spirits that you can just borrow. And I mean, certain aspects of London history, there are books. There's definitely books about Ambrose Small, for instance, lots of books about Ambrose Small. Just depends on how big the legend is. But yeah, that is the place I always go for research, is the London Room. They're there to help you.
Have you had anybody who's been a reader give you some response of how they've experienced reading through the book?
I've yet it's sold really well on Amazon, actually. I was very, very pleased, but I've yet to have a single review. So I'm a playwright. I'm used to being slammed, man. I've been bounced like a ping pong ball over the years. So like it or not like it, a review would be welcome.
Yeah.
But no, I haven't got a single review. I've even given people free books so that they would review it, and that was the agreement, but they've let me down like so many others.
It's in process.
Hobbs, you're one, Hobbs. Yeah.
As someone who's been so prolific and successful, if you could give any piece of advice to someone who was trying to break into the playwriting scene, what would it be?
I think I wish more people would seek mentorship. I feel like the young generation kind of knows it all sometimes, and I certainly relied on a mentor for all aspects of theater. John Turner, the great John Turner. He doesn't write plays, but he's everything else theater, and I learned so much for him. So when I started doing theater, there was so much respect for the people who came before me. And I'm not saying that's not there now, I just see less of it. And again, you learn because somebody takes an interest in you, but you kind of, your mentor's not going out looking to choose mentorees. You kind of have to ask somebody. So in terms of playwrights, I actually knew and loved the late James Rainey. And he was hard on me. Like he thought most of my early work I would count it as juvenilia. It really wasn't that good. But he would let me have it. But I'll never forget that James Rainey, probably one of the most famous playwrights in Canadian history, he would review my work, he would read it, and he would comment on it. And the one thing I never forgot, he said, write something that you could explain to a child in a few sentences. Like he gave me lots of advice, but that's what I've retained. So, and I don't always follow it, but that's just what I remember. But he was willing to review, even harshly. Because my first scripts are not great. He was willing to help me out. So, seek a mentor.
Wow, that is a perfect segue to a question that came in on Zoom from Peter Janes.
Oh, Peter Janes, yes.
I have a feeling you may know. You've worked with and mentored, look at that, perfect segue, a lot of other playwrights in London, Adam, Jason, Rachel, Jeff C., all the Frights of Spring, 1 to 6 writers, Spirits of Petersville, Eldon, etc. I just wanted to name all those things that he's got here in parentheses. Can you talk a bit about what that has involved, acting as dramaturge, consultant, co-writer, editor, organizer, other? So maybe, yourself as a mentor in the community of writers and playwrights.
Well, Adam Corrigan Hollowitz is doing great. And he's well beyond my mentorship now. He's his own adult creator. If I played any part in that, I'm really proud of him and what he's done. He's really one of the only things going on right now that I can see, doing new Canadian work, and doing a lot of it. So yeah, I've always tried to be a little bit giving. Some of the most successful recent works have been written with Rachel Gans. So I wanted to write some issue-based stuff because, again, I think it's something that is neglected in theater. People want the song and dance, People want to leave with their toes tapping. So two of the plays that did really well recently were co-written with Rachel Gans. One was about sex work in London, and one was about the propensity of men to kill themselves. Neither of which you'd think, screams success. Both of them did amazing. So I really do feel there's a market for the issue-based stuff. Now, writing with her, we basically kind of wrote independently, and then we pooled it together. Really hard to. There's times that I've done a more pure co-writing, where you basically both sit there and have to agree on whether a line is good or not good. That takes time. That takes so much time. And interestingly enough, a lot of the stuff that I've co-written that way has been comedies, which I don't specialize in. So that we would have to both agree to find it funny. That was how we kind of managed it.
Great. A really rich answer, too. I think it was Man Up was the one on...
Yeah, Man Up was in November, and it sold out the entire run. So, and it's about suicide. So.
Right. Not toe tapping.
It was, it wasn't meant to be bleak. It was meant to have some hope and some life-affirming parts to it. So,
somebody in the questions also asked, "Could you ever see a return of the Lost Soul Stroll?" This is a very me selfish question too to ask.
I'd have to wear a suit of armor if I was walking in downtown London. It even got worse over its lifespan. I personally wouldn't sign up for it. I'm not hardy enough to do it. I would write something. It all exists. It's already been written. and I wrote 9 years of it. So if somebody wanted to do, I think it could be done as an indoor thing, or just people could learn a lot about history. But to actually, you know what, during COVID, it wasn't me, but there was a play called Shadows of the Past that was my work, that was done with the smallest of audiences, because that was COVID. But they did it in downtown London. They did it. So one time I did a play with 10 women out in the alley out there about one of the victims of Reed's crystal disasters. But again, that was many years ago too. So right out in the alley.
A great place to wrap. I want to thank everybody who joined us here at TAP for tonight's conversation. Everybody who joined us online. It was a nice conversation that we'll share the chat with Jason, because there was another conversation that was happening online too while we were here in the space. Thank you to TAP for allowing us to be in your space to hold this event. Congratulations to Jason on his collection of spooky, scary stories, My Gehenna. Anybody watching out there live or on the video, get your copy and review your copy. So, or you know what? This is just to put, maybe this is doxing Jason, but he put it in there on his own. His email address is in here. So after you've read the book and your response, I'm sure Jason would love to hear from some readers about how they experienced.
Yeah, I'm numb to criticism at this point. It's
Numb to
fine.
criticism. But he's open to praise.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jason, for such generous responses, for joining us to talk about your book. I've thoroughly enjoyed hearing about your dark past, all the way from under 3, carrying the vestiges of the netherworld back into the world to give us such nice, spooky writing for the decades that you have in London, Ontario. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Buy a book.